Hey, everybody, it's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. I have such an incredible show for you today. So when we look from our plant-based bubble, we just think the world is rosy, rosy. And yet, at the same time, China is doubling down on chicken plants. And we also see in the United States that there's a lot of capital investment being done in the meat industry. So we ask ourselves, if plant-based is growing, like we think it is, then what's going on in the rest of the world and our own country that we're not seeing? Maybe we're in a bubble. Let's get out of our bubble. I want to bring on today's guest. So lucky to have him here. He is Jerry Gamez. He has such a resume. The former CEO of Pain Quotidien. He was also a former board member with Pain Quotidien, and he's a former Meatless Farm executive, also former with their board, taking them to 21 countries, 3 global headquarters. He had a long career with Burger King as well when he was in the States, which he no longer is, taking them on a huge growth trajectory. So much to talk to you about, Jerry. Thanks for being with me today.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, everybody, we all want to hear from Jerry, but just give me a second to set it up. So the Boston Consulting Group and Blue Horizon Corporation comes out with a study that says the plant-based the alt protein market is going to be worth $290 billion by 2035. This is a correction, or we'll say an advancement from what A.T. Kearney was saying, which is that it was going to be $240 billion by 2040. I recently had an interview with the former co-CEO of Whole Foods, Walter Robb. He says in his conversations, people are talking about a number like $500 billion. And yet we see China doubling down on chicken, and we see investment in chicken and even things like beef in the United States. In a recent Plant-Based Business Hour interview with Paul Shapiro, who works at the Better Food Company, he's talking about all these kinds of capital investments. So, Jerry, please, from your worldwide perspective and your perspective working in both worlds, plant-based, but also, Burger King and Pain Quotidien wasn't 100% plant-based by any means. Get us out of our bubble. What do you really see happening realistically in the plant-based landscape?
No, well, fantastic setup. And frankly, you mentioned Blue Horizon and BCG, and I got to give Bjorn and his team tremendous credit. I read through it very quickly. It was intense. It was spot on, but they did a fantastic job laying out the current state and the future state of plant-based. But as you said, the world is different. I said it earlier today, it's no longer a trend. It's no longer a mega trend. It's a movement. So every part of our lives are being shaped and have been shaped by what's happening. And so whether it's China, whether it's North America, Latin America, or EMEA, plant-based has shifted everything, and everything from going upstream all the way down to distribution. Everything is being re-examined and redialed in because it's not sustainable in the current pace we were at. And so now still a long way to go. We can dive into it, but clearly there's so much more to be done, and we're just scratching the surface, because every year the numbers will be moved. Every year they will shift. And until we get to parity in a lot of these areas, whether it's plant-based, whether it's fermentation, whether it's cell, that is going to drive really adoption. So a long way to go, but we're scratching the surface. So it's exciting time. Absolutely.
It's a huge, exciting time. And ultimately, what we're really talking about is not alt protein. What we're talking about is how alt protein will shift the entire food supply system. And when you start realizing how unsustainable the whole process is, you realize you have to change the entire process. But I don't want to be Pollyanna about this. I mean, in the short term, we're still seeing capital investment. There, I'll give you an example, because you're a world traveler and I am too. I was hiking in Bhutan, and not many Americans hiking in Bhutan, and I run across an executive with Cargill. So we start hiking together, and he's telling me all about Cargill's plans. This is December of 2018. And he says, Cargill's changing their name to a protein company. Okay, we know that. It used to be that they would go into meetings and they would have to really advocate for funding. Now, if you mention the word sustainability, they get funding right away. But that mostly they don't care what they make. They'll make anything. If that means a plant-based burger for McDonald's in India, they'll do it. And that he saw, and this is what I think we're living through now, that the growth to plant-based would be dramatically almost happen overnight. When it would come, it would be like a tsunami. And I think we're seeing that now, that the change is coming really fast, almost like a smack in the head. 5 years from now, it'll be completely different than what it is today. But at the same breath, he tells me, His job is to create kelp so that they can sustainably farm the feed they give to chickens to make more chickens in an unsustainable way. So sometimes I think we're progressing, but maybe we're not.
There's definitely one step forward, one step backwards at times. But the reality is that we're learning. It's simply the fact that it's a learning curve.
Yes.
Oftentimes we feel so good about the progress we've made, but then we identify another dimension that wasn't necessarily examined. It's not necessarily as we don't know about it. It's just who has the bandwidth and who's actually taking the lead to understand that part of the value chain. Because you're right. Do we shift one problem to the next? And now we're moving product from the animal feed or from the animals over to plant-based. Well, what does that do to the other parts of the business? So depending on where you sit in the value chain, it's where the tension lies. So the value chain is constant. So once you pull one side of the string, what does it do to the other end? And that's what we're seeing. But the reality is everyone's excited. Everyone knows it is not tenable to do what we're doing now. There's no way we can continue. So what are the fundamental changes that we can anchor our big movements? And the interesting thing, as you said, there's a lot of capital being deployed. So it's not about capital now, it's about the effective use of that capital and the stewardship around that capital. Because at a certain point, things will change, and fundamentally they have to change. But capital is not a problem today. It's how we're going to use that capital in the most elegant fashion to ensure that we have more enthusiastic entrepreneurs out there to continue to build upon this. If not, it will be a slow burn. But the reality is parity gets everyone excited, investors and potential retailers. So I think that's one of the upsides that we can see, because now we're mapping out that, yes, we're getting better at taste. Yes, our texture is getting closer, but price parity, this is value chain isn't quite there yet. So there's a lot of opportunity, both upstream and downstream. And I think this leaves nothing but upside for the business and for the sustainability efforts that we have ahead of us.
So much to unpack there. I'll just say that we talk about the benefits being sustainability, obviously animal welfare, reducing healthcare costs, as well as reducing or reversing disease for people. But I'll also say for the people who aren't mission aligned and are just jumping onto the dollar bandwagon, lots of opportunity for you to make money here, because this isn't, as you say, just a trend or a fad. This is a secular shift. So a lot of money to be made every time there's a secular shift, like you have with semiconductors or the digital age, et cetera. We are moving to and building a completely new food supply system. So there's a lot of money to be made in that. But I wonder, as you talk about investment and how investors are getting excited about price parity, which the Boston Consulting Group and Blue Horizon Corporation study really showed that that's going to be a big part of the growth. We're seeing the Good Food Institute came out with $3.1 billion were invested in alt proteins, which was more than all the money invested from 2010 through 2019. But a lot of those investors aren't mission aligned. Do you have any concern that these investment dollars coming from the outside, big Goliaths in the field, are going to push the growth in the wrong way? Perhaps I'll say like greenwashing, maybe not doing it to the best ethical intention. I'm butchering that, but I hope you know what I mean.
No, I do. There's never a clear-cut answer to any of this. We have to recognize as an entire ecosystem that there will always be players that are not aligned. But the vast majority of people understand the reality. They've been awakened. We've all been awakened. We can no longer neglect what's in front of us. Now it's a choice. When people are asked to choose right from wrong or better or worse, they generally lean in toward the optimistic side and they choose for better or right. The challenge is, how do we continue to bring people along? It cannot be a polarizing. We cannot finger point at anyone, including corporations. So how do we educate them to ensure not that they need the fundamental education, the education around doing what's right every single day, even when people aren't watching? Oftentimes people only do the right thing when people are looking, but are they doing the right things when they're not looking? And I think that's the fundamental challenge that we have right now, that there is a lot of publicity, a lot of capital dollars being deployed, but underlying those investment dollars, there are still some behaviors, because it's those behaviors that have to change. And that is what takes time. You cannot break a behavior overnight. And so I think it's fundamental step by step, but it has to continue going long term. if those dollars are going to be deployed properly, which oftentimes they start off being moved in the right direction, which is huge. But what happens ultimately is that there is a commercial bent that has to be rationalized and it has to be satisfied. So if in fact the board and the consumers are patient, we will get there. But it's when we get boards as as a general theme that lose that appetite for the wait, and the horizon keeps shortening and shortening. So there's a long way to go, but we do see that happening in a methodical way now.
So again, you bring up so many good points. It's usually not the forte, I speak for the US perhaps only, to have long-term thinking. Usually you need short-term results, particularly if you're a public company. You see it in politics, you see it in business. Do you see the mindset shifting? Because the math is so obvious, right? Even on the back of a napkin, you can see that we don't have enough. We're going from 7 billion people to 10 billion people, but we're not getting more land and we're not getting more water. So, that's pretty clear from a business perspective. You can see the math. Do you see that these boards are changing their lifestyle as well as understanding the math?
So I think there's a lot, like you've said, there's a lot to unpack there. The boards, from my visibility into many of the boards today, both whether it's a restaurant, retail, or CPG business within plant-based, and in Europe and in the US, which I have very close visibility to, particularly right now with a couple projects, we see the enthusiasm around this by far. And I've been now in Europe for 10 years, so I've seen the evolution from this side as an American. As I go back to the US, I also see the change. Do I see it as fast as what we're seeing, the adoption and the embrace of plant-based in the US? I do see the enthusiasm, but there's still a lot of opportunity to get into the root. If we look at the sustainable farming, if we look at the base ingredients, that tells us a little bit about the regulations and about enforcing and the enforcement of those regulations. Every market has a different standard. I could take a step back and say, if we look at the ingredient specs and the regulations associated with farming and harvesting and the production of these products, even something as simple as numbers, taking a product from Europe and moving it into a different part of the world may have immediately high level of acceptance. Taking a product from another part of the world may have to go through a lot more rigor in order to get placed in this business. And there's some notable plant-based companies that were trading in other parts of the world where they attempted to bring their products into the EU and had to slow down their launch simply because their ingredient deck wasn't there. So I do see a bigger acceptance, but it does have to have a commercial understanding very early on, because no zone, whether it's North America, Latin America, or Asia Pacific, everyone has a slightly different regulatory body, and that regulatory body has to shift in alignment with the market. And if we get that regulatory strength and backing, we will then be able to reach price parity at a rate that is acceptable. But if not, it will be pushed out beyond 2035, as we've noted earlier. So.
Again, so much to unpack there. I'll say two short things, and then we can talk about the EU and their recent regulatory backstep, I'll say, on dairy. First of all, from now on, it should be a rule that if you are going to join a board, you can only show up to that meeting if you bring your teenage daughter. Because if you bring your teenage daughter, then we would have success beyond measure. So that would be a fast way to do things. I'm concerned about what's going on in the EU. We started this conversation by saying, hey, if you're watching plant-based news, the world is super rosy. And yet there's still a lot of capital investment in meat and dairy. I was surprised by the EU's backstep. They seemed okay in supporting regulatory words around meat, but they've really gone backwards with Amendment 171. And I'm not up to date where they are now, but has that been voted on yet? 171?
I don't know, to be honest.
Yes, fair enough. Yes. Yeah. But they showed resistance, whether it's been voted on or not. There's been a lot of resistance around dairy in Europe, and the use of the word dairy, the use of the word cheese, even the packaging that might show a milk carton. They don't want anyone. It's so anti-consumer. I'm not even sure where to go with it. So that's like a step backwards that I'm surprised we're seeing when the numbers are so obvious. So, but you're saying, if I'm understanding correctly, that you see support in Europe, despite the fact that governments are the last ones to get on board.
Absolutely. There is support across the board. Academia, ETH here in Switzerland, Wageningen University, obviously in the Netherlands. These institutions are leading. They're out in the forefront. They're not only championing academia within their own institution, but they're also championing entrepreneurs, the industry. So that collaboration, that tight collaboration, is crystallizing into something very powerful that allows the market and the regulatory bodies to see that this is not something that's going away. This is part of what we need to do. And I think that crystallization between entrepreneurship and academia is it's really thriving here in Europe, particularly in Northwest Europe. Elizabeth, it's incredibly powerful what we're seeing here now.
Yeah, and I think this kind of combined effort only has an exponential effect on the market. Israel's been very good at doing this,
Absolutely.
of combining academia and government support and entrepreneurs. Big Idea Ventures here in the United States has been interested in harnessing, I don't know if you've been following this, but they're working on a fund that would harness the educational IP, the institutional IP that usually takes place in a lot of farmland areas, like the University of Illinois is in farmland, but it has a great engineering program. So you could see those communities benefit from those innovations happening right in their universities rather than being shipped out to help the big cities with plant-based innovation, but keeping it in the rural community. So it's a bit grassroots and institutions at the same time. But we haven't really had government support in the U.S. Not a lot of funding. There was something, I think, $3.5 million for a study in UC Davis, but this is a drop in the bucket when we talk about research. So
it takes time. Sometimes we are so impatient that we want things to happen yesterday. But if we think back, I was looking at a map and of the landscape in 2018 earlier on a call, and there was literally maybe 40 key brands on this landscape map. Now, some of these different maps that Olivia Fox always produces, if we look at just 3 years later, it's incredible. And if we double click and simply unpack what's already just in dairy, it's incredible. So it takes time, but even as much progress we've made, we have to be patient. I mean, no one's going to come on board. And I have to go back just to my own experience. I remember 10 years ago when I first arrived in Europe, I remember I landed in Amsterdam, and I remember I looked at a restaurant looking at the portion sizes. I started just examining everything. And it wasn't until I realized, like, wow, okay, things are different. And so it took me time to reduce my animal protein intake, and it just takes time. And I think governments have a tendency of, taking some time on certain aspects.
Yes, so true. Really, if you want change, you have to do it yourself. It comes from the ground up, and then governments get on board. At least that's how it's been usually in the U.S. So I understand what you're saying, patience. But if one watches Seaspiracy and follows what's happening there, you say, well, we don't have time. We don't have time to be patient. So, get with the program, everybody. Okay. But I want to hone in on your experience, which you had just mentioned, coming from your perspective. You spent a lot of time in QSR, quick serve restaurants. So Burger King being in your long resume. I'm wondering if you could give us a landscape for quick serve restaurants. For example, Burger King in the UK said that they're going to be 50% plant-based by 2030 in 9 years. I'm wondering where you see the QSR landscape going.
So just notably, I think the entire restaurant industry is really embracing plant-based, and RBI, which is the owner of Burger King, I think under the leadership of Jose Sil, has done an incredible job in transforming that entire investment. Well, all three brands, right? They have not only Burger King, they have Popeyes, and they also have Tim Hortons. But specifically with Burger King, they've made a significant bet on cleaning in their entire ingredient decks. So what has happened in Miami has only trickled down into what's happening in the UK. So the big bet of that operating partner in the UK is simply saying, we're going to transition, and we're going to transition at a faster rate. And that's fantastic. It's exciting. Yeah. Think about it. For Burger King to plant that flag and to have the leadership behind it, all the way up and down through the investment community, is fantastic. And so that's not normal. They went bold, they did it. And now if you look at what they're doing, it's not just something that they're placing on a placard and saying, here's what we're going to do. It's happening from within the organization. So that's exciting to see. And the UK Burger King leadership team is went bold, and they're leading from the front. So it's exciting. But the reality is QSR is broader than simply burgers and fries, right? There's a lot more out there. And so there are a lot of early stage businesses that are in QSR, but also sit into that next category, which we call fast casual, which takes that next blend. And I think between QSR and fast casual, which ultimately is quick service restaurant, I think it's fantastic. And so today, when you engage a quick service restaurant and as a plant-based manufacturer or brand, you can really help them innovate their menu architecture. Oftentimes, they need a little inspiration. So if brands that have a proper plant-based brands that have a proper innovation team could really work with the brands, they could end up helping them design an entire seasonal launch in a matter of a few weeks, and then already have their spring, summer, autumn, and winter menu, and they could transform what they're doing today. Because you know as well as I do, oftentimes brands will probably have a burger, maybe one or two sides, and that's their vegan or plant-based menu. I think there's a golden opportunity to partner with the brands, help them, educate them, and be patient with them because they just don't know. And having come from the retail and restaurant side many years ago, I can tell you that it's a process and it takes time.
Yeah, I love what you say here. So going back to my history when I was in CPG brand management with the Kellogg Company and I was on Special K and Frosted Mini Wheats, we used to always say there's a lot of equity in being first. So I think Burger King is very smart to put a stake in the ground and come out shouting, oh, hey, we're going to be 50% plant-based because this is happening. Get with the program or don't, but this is happening. There's really no choice about it. We all know the math. So I think the brands that are willing to be out in front, fast and loud, have a lot to gain here. And I love what you say about partnerships that, you know, in the world we live in, everything should have happened yesterday. And we're also used to multitasking and we have no patience. If you want to get to market fast, partnership with some of those plant-based brands that can help you get there, help you understand the marketplace, help you understand the consumer. I see, because of my consulting business, Plant Powered Consulting, I work with a lot of companies on marketing, media, communication strategy. A lot of companies come to this thinking, I'll just put plant-based on the front and that'll be enough. And one multinational company in particular, they were like, well, we've got the scientists, we've got the distribution channels, we've got the ingredients, we can make it and put it out there. Why isn't it selling? Well, because it doesn't mean anything to you. You have no communication strategy. Who are you even talking to? Just putting plant-based on the label isn't enough. And partnering with a brand that knows this space, or consultants or strategists or yourself, for example, can really help people understand the market. Okay, so please.
No, what I was saying, that's exactly right. Oftentimes where, and even on the other end, Elysabeth, brands will sell product or, to the restaurant brands, but oftentimes they don't understand the operational process, the equipment, or the staging process. And so oftentimes they send in a tremendous product. It cooked well in the innovation lab and it cooked well at someone's home, but then they send it into a restaurant operation. And there are so many steps and so many procedures in order to prepare for the day and different types of equipment. And so all of those components need to be examined before we just ship out products to restaurateurs for them to then end up with a new entree, new menu. Because if that is not calculated into the processing, into the fibers, into the taste profile of that product, then that experience can weaken the confidence of the brand and ultimately the consumer. So they may get that novelty buy, but they won't get that repeat purchase, which is, you know, frequency is key in any business, particularly restaurants these days. So.
Yeah, sure. You only have one chance at the customer, so you can't mess it up. But I love what you're saying. It's, to me, I look at it from sort of a bird's eye view when I hear you say these things. I'm mission aligned personally. This work means something to me. So I'm always thinking about, well, how do we bring the world around quicker, faster to benefit everyone, animals, people, the planet. So when you tell me hey, look, you really need education when you ship in that product. And hey, you really need to teach people about the equipment, and you need new equipment. Actually, we're not even talking yet about the co-manufacturing issue where there's not enough equipment and co-manufacturers who know what to do with plant-based and how to make it because it's a different process. We might have to have a second conversation, Jerry. But what I see is, cha-ching, you're talking about job growth. So this is, nothing converts people to plant-based like a paycheck. So you're talking about a very healthy economy with job growth because we're recreating the whole food supply system. And that means healthy jobs for everyone. It's a grand general statement, but I see there's lots of opportunity for jobs here as well.
It really is. I could concretely talk about a couple of examples here.
Great.
In Europe. Simply, I know I'm involved with supporting a couple plant-based brands, and they were wondering why they couldn't break through these food service and restaurants. Retail, we understand there's a couple buying cycles, a couple windows. We know that there will be listing fees. We understand that we have to pitch to the buyers. That's a standard process. So I'm not saying it's less elegant, but it's just more straightforward. It's still difficult. When you get into food service and into restaurant, it's a little more dynamic. The sales cycle is different. The restaurant operations is different. So they do have to think and behave differently. And I do think that restaurateurs and brand managers and these and manufacturers, both that are really going, as you said, we're not going to even talk about extruders or manufacturers there, but simply the brands itself, the CPG brands working with the restaurant brands. There's such an opportunity and there's a divide. So I do think that the brands do have to come back into the restaurants and understand. If they understand how the restaurant operates, I think it's a fundamental opportunity. But in relating to job growth, I do think there's a huge opportunity for restaurant professionals to partner with CPG brands, because I think that expertise can help them accelerate their sales opportunity with some of these restaurant brands. Speaking the same language allows them to gain comfort and allows them to move through that, I would say, through the organization in a more accepting way, I would say, by far. So.
Yes, that makes so much sense. When you say restaurant professional, do you mean restaurant consultants or?
I think executives, anyone who understands the restaurant operation, that can sit down with the CPG organization and any restaurant brand and any of these larger organizations that have plant-based foods. Many of them are hiring food service professionals, restaurant advisors. But I think if we really want to accelerate that these restaurant professionals, executives or consultants, whoever knows the business, I think will ultimately build the right toolkit, the right process in order for that sales organization to really shorten that sales cycle, because there is a little bit of a divide. It just really is.
When you say a divide, you mean there's a significant percentage of the restaurant industry that doesn't want to see this come down the pipeline? Is that what you mean?
What I mean is that a divide from the sales professionals on the consumer product goods companies that actually need to integrate into the restaurant operations to understand that. Because I do think what's been happening the last 2 years, probably in 2019, early 2020, a lot of brands would ship product, Elysabeth, and sell product to these restaurant brands. And then they would allow those organizations to sort of manage that. So when the product wasn't delivered properly, so they thought there was a problem with the product, and therefore they would not come back, right? So you have one opportunity to impress. And I think there's an opportunity for CPG companies to really accelerate sales by figuring out what is really happening in that sales cycle and why that product isn't converting to a proper product once they get to the restaurant. There's a big gap there.
Mm-hmm. I understand now what you're saying. Well, maybe we can talk about your personal experience. I believe this happened under your watch when you were at Le Pain Quotidien in 2019. You brought in Just Egg. And that had to be quite the learning curve, right? So how did that go down? First of all, how did you convince upper level management, or you or the team, convince upper level management that this is something that you wanted to try at Le Pain Quotidien? And then, Just Egg isn't your normal, that's a big learning curve to get that product right.
Frankly, it was fantastic. I wish I had a more elegant answer than saying that I was actually attending Singularity University in Palo Alto, and part of our executive course gave us, I think it was like 2 days, where we had an opportunity to go visit a lot of startups, a few notable ones. One of them was Just, And we tried their product. And at that time, I was the CEO of Le Pen. And I remember myself and my colleagues, a couple of my colleagues from our company joined us, and we were so excited. And we started that dialogue immediately once we got back to New York and connected our manufacturing company, because at Le Pen, we had both the restaurant company and we also had a manufacturing business. So we had 5 manufacturing locations in the US. And so we partnered with Just, figured out the right formulation for our product, had the right testing in the kitchen, and we rolled it out in our US locations. Was it difficult? Look, let's be honest, it wasn't exactly like egg when we first received it, but in collaboration with Just, we were able to find the right formulation, the right approach, and we successfully launched it into the entire US market with Le Pen. So it was one of our best selling products, and to this day it's still there and thriving. So, and you're right, Le Pen wasn't a fully plant-based company, but we called it, we're a plant leaning company. So we were systematically going through our menu architecture to make it a little more plant friendly. So
it's so beautiful. Le Pen has the plant slant, which is great. Whenever I would go in, I was always amazed how many bakery goods were available to me as a vegan. So I don't know if I should thank you or curse you, because I did end up eating a lot of cookies. Oh gosh. Well, okay. So we've talked about Burger King, where, you had a lot of experience, and Le Pain Quotidien, but you've also been with the Meatless Farmer, and you've helped them expand to 21 countries, 3 global headquarters. I'm wondering what you've learned and what you've seen transpire there, because during your time with the Meatless Farmer, the world as we know it in our plant-based space has literally changed dramatically. So I'm wondering what you learned from that whole experience.
So it was really on the heels of Singularity, the launch of Just, and then really building a relationship with Meatless Farm. I was very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time, where it made sense to start advising them. And really, Elysabeth, I wasn't intended, it was never a long-term role. It was really something that I would just advise and learn. But I met the team, spent time with the founder, met the board, and I was really excited. And it went from 1 day a week to 7 days a week, right? It went completely. And frankly, it was because I was learning, and it was such a great project. It was so transformational. And for me to be able to soak it all in and understand what was happening in real time, spending time with farmers in Canada, spending time literally in the field, visiting different markets, understanding what was happening, I quickly realized that it's not just even about plant-based or burgers and sausage and meat. There's this whole ecosystem out there. So quickly seeing what was happening with fermentation, milk, seeing what was happening with egg, all of these changes was happening in real time. And yet, frankly, I didn't know about it. And so since 2018 to now, the world is very different. I mentioned Olivia Fox's landscape map. That I've seen it real time transform. And so I think the relationships that we made in Asia Pacific, the relationships we made in Calgary, these are long lasting relationships that I can still pick up the phone and call and ask anything, any advice that I need about the ecosystem. So it's very transformative, and it was a great ride. And frankly, I was very grateful for the opportunity to learn and to meet a lot of great people there. So
yeah, I'll say that's one of the fun things for me, being a consultant in this space and being so, deeply committed and doing a lot of research. It really is a small community when it gets down to it. I mean, you can almost call up anybody, as you say, on the phone and get your answer from anywhere around the world. It's really very, very exciting. Well, hats off to the work you did there. And then, of course, the entire Meatless Farm team. So great. They've had such a growth trajectory, and they've been very strong in their marketing. So I always love to see that, because previously I was saying, not everyone hones in on how they have to communicate with the consumer. And the Meatless Farm has been really strong with how they communicate, very much like Oatly, really mapping out who they want to talk to, the way they talk to them, what their brand voice and style is, and therefore carving out market share for themselves. Very smart, not just slapping plant-based on the label. So some really, really cool stuff there. Well, okay, so you went from something quite large like Le Pain Quotidien to the Meatless Farm, I'll say startup at the time, sort of when you were there. I'm wondering if you have any tips for growing companies, because in your own professional life, you've been very committed to mentorship mentorship and this type of personal development. So I'm wondering what tips you can give to quickly growing companies.
There's so much there, and we can definitely have an hour just around tips. But
That.
I think in my experience, and not only just seeing the business from the North American market or from the European market, I think, but taking a blended approach or a blended experience, I could say the one thing that's been fundamental for me, and even now as in a few projects that I'm working with, it comes down to having a very, very clear vision of what the company will be and will not be. I think oftentimes what is notoriously consistent is that there will be a moment when any entrepreneur will feel that pressure of whether they can go or they're not going to go. And so there will be a moment where they need to bring in capital. And that capital oftentimes comes with some sort of requirement that it is important to really hold out to find that partner that's going to really provide them the oxygen necessary to grow, not just the capital to maintain. And I think that is probably one of the biggest opportunities, and I would say suggestions, finding that right partner that really has your best interest and the company's best interest. It's hard. So what do you have to do? Start early. Start early. As soon as you have that idea, start developing the ecosystem, go out, because everything takes long. Everything takes time. I know I sound like a broken record now, but it does take time.
Yeah.
So whether it's a small raise of 100, 500,000 euros, or it's a 500, or 5 million or 10 million, it takes just as long to close that deal. So I think entrepreneurs, especially first-time entrepreneurs, I don't think quite understand that. They think that sometimes things move fast, that when an investor or VC says, oh, yes, I'm ready to invest, that means within 20 days. It's about a 6-month project before that check is in the bank. So they have to build that in. I think that's number one. Number two, which I think is pretty strong for me, is maintaining the self of culture. They have to understand what their culture is, but not just in broad terms, Elysabeth. Identifying the behaviors that they will not accept and the behaviors that they will accept in the company. I think those are two big things. There's a list, and we can go through it. But if I had to say, if there's 2 areas for entrepreneurs, start identifying the ecosystem and the partners that are going to really back you and that will give you the oxygen to really grow and bring your vision to life. And number 2, what are the behaviors that you will tolerate and accept within the organization and ensure that you stay firm, including for yourself? Because oftentimes I think there's a moving target, and we blame it on the fact that we're a startup and it's early stage, and that's why certain things are tolerated. So
you are taking me back to 2 of my very favorite phrases that apply to business, but also to apply in life. So for the first one, when you're looking for that strategic partner, one of my very favorite phrases is only hang out with people who get the vision. So life is short. We don't have a lot of time. If you're with an investor who doesn't get the vision, and that's the vision for your entire plan, not just the making money part, but the whole thing, you got to move on to the next investor, as hard as that might be, because you only want to hang out with people who get the vision. And the next is know who you are and be great at it. So you got to really know your company culture. And that comes down to the founder and what they believe, but that you want to infiltrate that within the entire company. Because when you see the kind of growth patterns we're seeing now, and the companies are growing so quickly, you can easily lose that company culture. It's like fairy dust. It'll just blow away if you're not really sure upfront and early who you are and what you stand for. And these kind of brand decks, I do a lot of them for my clients, really important, because they're all running around so quickly that they often have to come back to the brand deck and they're like, oh yeah, that's right. Oh, that's right. Okay, that's what we believe, because it's overwhelming, the rate and pace at which change is coming. And if you don't hold on to your company culture, it gets washed away. Very hard to get it back. And then you find that, I don't want to say you're nothing special in the marketplace, but the sparkle isn't there.
it is.
Yeah.
I agree. No, that's a good content. No, I agree 100%. It's fascinating that you highlight it, but you summarize it very well. That's exactly, I think, one of the challenges, that as soon as you're a little bit of everything, you're you don't really have your center anymore. So that's clear.
Yes. Yes. Know who you are and be great at it. Okay. I know we said we'd kind of keep it tight on time today. I have a couple quickie exit questions and then maybe one bigger exit question at the end. I'm wondering what you would like to see in the marketplace that isn't yet there.
Wow. That's a good question. Frankly, I grew up in Southern California, and maybe because I lived in Europe for a while now, but I haven't been back to California in 2 years. But I do believe that there is a huge opportunity for more plant-based ethnic snacking items. I believe that there's a lot of plant-based Asian snacks, whether they're gyozas, dumplings, spring rolls, with a lot of this plant-based or high moisture extrusion product. But I do think that Latin American and even Spanish plant-based snack items, pastries, savory or sweet pastry, I think that would be a tremendous opportunity for two reasons. One, I think the flavors are just incredible. So they're indulgent in flavors, but it's also convenience. I think that convenience factor is just tremendous, particularly as we're commuting, when we resume commuting. It's fantastic. Or even when you're at home, if you can have a proper, healthy, plant-based snack that you can, whether it's whether you grill, whether you have it immediately right out of the pack, whatever the case may be, I think that would be fantastic. So I think international cuisine platforms within that plant-based space, having those more targeted, I think that's what I would like to see more relating to plant-based.
And are you looking at the global consumer, or are you looking at the targeted cultural consumer? So plant-based options for the Hispanic market or plant-based options for the Asian market?
I think so. I think there are a lot of companies out there that are doing the mass market. I think these smaller, more targeted approach, it is a winner. And that's including for halal products, kosher approved products. I think all of these areas are huge opportunities for the market. Because if we think about most of the players today and some of the larger ones that have large valuations, and even the middle tier, but there's a lot, there's only 2 or 3 that are really at top, and then everyone else is sort of in the middle and below. But it's mass market, and it's the right approach to create the momentum. But I think now is a natural evolution for the CPG product line to really start targeting these smaller niche groups. And by the way, niche, I'm still talking about sizable businesses, right?
They're huge.
We're not talking about 1 or 2 million. We're still talking about billion-dollar businesses. So,
well, they're huge. And interestingly enough, culturally, they already have a very vegan, vegetarian base. They're very plant-based, the Hispanic market with rice and beans, and the Asian market already with a heavy familiarity with vegetables. So really easy bases there. But I love how you're making it very accessible for the modern day cultural consumer, because you're talking about snacks. You're talking about things on the go, things that are convenient. And ultimately, regardless of your heritage, you don't have any time, just like the rest of us. All of us are short on time. We're all running around like crazy.
And Elizabeth, that addresses all 3 channels. I think it addresses restaurants, I think it addresses food service and retail. So I think there's a huge opportunity. And I know there's a couple companies out there that are putting significant time and building those out too. So.
Yes. We'll come back to that in our second talk. We'll see who's doing what in this area. I'll just say that, I think the alt materials market, we talked about, a plant-based lifestyle, not just a plant-based diet. I think the alt materials market is going to parallel the alt protein market. It's just going to have a lag of about 10 years. So I'm looking to see plant-based wool. I know leather's doing great things. I'm so excited about what Hermes is doing with their Victoria bag and what Stella McCartney's doing, but I'm looking for plant-based wool. So I'll keep that on everybody's radar. Okay. I don't know if are you 100% plant-based or still kind of dabbling in and around?
No, I still dabble.
You still dabble?
I still dabble.
Okay. Okay. So I wanted to ask you this question in a way that is right for you. So let me see if I can rephrase it. When was the moment you knew, and it might have been at the just visit. I don't know. When was the moment you knew where it solidified in your head and you said, wow, this plant-based thing's going to be huge?
It was in Palo Alto at Singularity, when
Okay.
when we were having these different discussions, and there was such an enthusiasm around not only food tech but med tech, biotech. It was, I think it was simply something that I had been thinking about for at least 3 years. There was a colleague here in Zurich. His name was Michael Baer, and he kept saying, "Jerry, you should attend Singularity." And he attended, I think, in Milan, and I was supposed to join him, but I couldn't make it. I was traveling, and I finally remember doing it. And I remember sitting in that class, and I'm like, "Wow, this is interesting." And every hour, every day, just got more and more exciting, and I was really passionate. And as we started visiting these startups, it just crystallized, and I left there incredibly enthusiastic. So I would say that was it by far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
It's such a fun time when that light bulb goes off and you say like, oh my God, this is the way. And it's not just the way for one solution. It's the way for like 7 solutions. I exaggerate. Maybe it's the way for 5 solutions: animal welfare, people's health, healthcare costs, taxes and subsidies, the environment, even food injustice, right? Social injustice. Like the list is pretty long. And even what it does to communities where there's slaughterhouses and how those communities are adversely affected. The list is really, really long. So yeah, when that light bulb goes off and you think, oh my gosh, I can be hopeful for humanity again. That's really how it was for me. Well, I'm taking a little side journey because I think with your international perspective, you could weigh in on this before I round up with a couple final last minute questions. But you are a world traveler. You're now in Zurich, I believe, but you've traveled all over the world. I'm wondering if you think that concept of veg tech, and by that I mean investing in researching companies that are innovating to take animals out of the supply chain for the betterment of the entire food supply system, like we discussed, is going to be an issue of national security. So what did we learn in the pandemic? We learned that pandemics disrupt job supplies and food supplies. When there aren't food supplies available to everyone, countries start becoming very insular. Trade is stressed if it wasn't already stressed by someone irrational and orange. So, trade is stressed and companies sort of become insular and they don't want to trade. And you see countries like Singapore saying, well, we can't have this kind of food insecurity and we can't be so reliant on everyone else. We're going to have to start investing in cellular options because we need to make our own food. So it becomes an issue of national security. Do you see that on anybody's radar?
So it's interesting. My daughter is studying at Basel University and her doctoral program, and her work is around conflict resolution. And we were talking about this, and it's interesting because I didn't think about it until she highlighted I think you mentioned something earlier that every board member should bring their daughter.
Yes.
So short answer is yes, absolutely, because it's about survival, it's resources. So there's only so much to go about. I mean, it's very similar to what we discussed around carbon. I'm drawing a blank now, but it's carbon offsetting, right? So if we think about carbon offsetting, we have these countries that have, and they're able to offset by doing other things. Well, at a certain point, the resources that we have in our own backyard may not be sufficient to take care of ours. So what do we have to do? And it's automatically we look at our neighbor and our neighboring countries. So that is a reality. So if there are only a few superpowers out there that are already devising this, and this is, I would say, fairly well studied in certain markets. But when you mention Singapore, most of their products that they consume are imported. So countries like Singapore, they're in the forefront, right? That's why they're investing so heavily, and partners like Bueller or Givaudan are investing heavily, co-investing with them to set up these facilities to make them so self-sufficient and reliant and self-reliant, because it's not feasible. And so, yes, is it going to be an issue? Absolutely. But I think this is where I think the joined up effort to address this food transformation is so critical, not just business, academia, but really we need regulatory support to really put that fine pressure on those pinch points to ensure that the value chain is really being taken care of. Because without that, Elizabeth, it's like it's like just dropping dimes in the water, right? It's not enough. We need the full joint effort. And I think those 3 areas are key for us going forward.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you're right about Singapore. Right now, they import about 90% of their food. They're only 10% food self-sufficient. There's a movement, that's not the right word, but there's something in place for investments such that Singapore will be 30 by 2030. That means 30% of their food they'll make themselves, and they'll only import 70, which is still a large amount. So you can see the impetus for them wanting to be self-sufficient and invest in the same. Okay, so as we round out this interview, I'm wondering a little bit of a philosophical question. What do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
Wow. I think a lot, but I don't even know what. Oh my God.
I should really maybe say like 3, 4, 5 years ago, because now time moves so quickly. 10 years is like when you were a kid, but okay, let's say 5 years ago.
So I would say now that I'm more aware of what's happening to the ecosystem, I wish I would have, frankly, I would have placed that type of awareness. I wish I would have understood the impact of my actions relating to the environment and the industries I chose to spend time with. That I think that's important, because that has a cascading effect on everything I do. It's the way I consume food, the way I interact with my children, what the food that I bring home, how we commute. And we've made some big changes, Elizabeth, and I have to tell you that we, 7 years ago when we moved to Switzerland, we decided not to purchase a car. So 7 years ago when we moved here, we said we would try it for the first year and use this public system as we were going through our own journey as a family. Of course, there was a lot of anxiety amongst the kids and everyone, because we live on a hill. And so we'd have to walk up and down to get to the train stop. But it's only, by the way, it's only 7 minutes. It's only 7 minutes. So it's not like it's huge. But year 1 went by. We said, let's give it another shot. Year 2, 7 years later, we still use public transportation everywhere we go. We, of course, in Switzerland, you recycle and pretty much everything. But it's a way of life. And so I wish that type of approach to being, I would have adopted many years ago. Maybe not 10 years ago, because we've been doing it for 7, but probably maybe 20 years ago. I wish I had that. I wish, but I didn't. So I would say that, because you know you're trying, and you know you're influencing, and it takes time. But I think that's a good feeling when you know you're doing the right thing. Even when no one's looking. Yeah.
Yes, it feels so great to be aligned with your own values. And sometimes you don't realize that you've gotten out of sync with your own values, and then you align with your values again, and you feel like 150% of yourself. It feels so good to be doing that, what you always wanted to do, and get rid of some of the baggage. Sometimes having more is just more weight on you, and having less makes you roll through life a little easier. So I love that story. Thank you. I always say that I wish I knew that I had to advocate for myself. Of course, I'm always sort of had a big mouth, so you don't think of me as someone not advocating for themselves. But I was listening to doctors and governments, and even social pressure around me that we had to have meat, couldn't survive without it, and I always knew it wasn't right for me, and I just wish that I had advocated for myself, even if I was a lone voice in a sea of other voices. I wish I had advocated for myself earlier. Okay. As we roll out, you're a big traveler. Do you have a favorite country? And if you want to narrow that to Europe only, you can, or the world. Favorite country?
So frankly, we love Spain. As a family, Spain is just great. We particularly love Malaga and Barcelona. Those are just good spots. It's great for the winter, and it's great for the summer. And frankly, we love the lifestyle.
Yeah.
And the food's great. It's, yes, I would say absolutely. There's so many reasons, but we have a good time. Family would always say, let's just fly to Barcelona. It's 2 hour flight, an hour and 50-minute flight to Barcelona. So we can get there fairly quickly. So
Seville is one of my favorite favorite cities on the planet. I just love all the citrus trees around in the park, and then the Arab influence. It's just so exotic. I love you, Spain. I'm waiting for you to get rid of bullfighting pretty much today. I'd like that done. Thank you, Spain. Please get on that. Okay, you have been an inspiration to so many. You've been a leader, as you say, a mentor. I'm wondering if you have one phrase you tell yourself if you're having a bad day to get yourself back in the game.
So I have it in my in in my recurring daily calendar when I'm having a bad day, or I think I need to do more. I think whatever bad day, and it's stay humble and work hard, and that's it. I think that's it, and it's in my every morning shows up, and I think that's it. But oftentimes I would forget that what I have, and sometimes I worry about what I don't have, and so on and so on. So it's like, I think like I don't know if everyone else, but for me, that was it. So I think it comes from what my parents always said, work hard, stay humble, and that keeps me grounded and reminds me of home and my family. So.
Isn't that lovely? Again, thank you for sharing that. You and I are hitting on a lot of the same themes. I always like to say nose to the grindstone, eyes to the sky. So I also come from that, like, work hard and, yeah. Great phrase. Thank you for that. Okay. You're running around. You're super busy. You don't have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
So I have a banana. I have bananas. I just grab a banana. So I'm on the way because it's always around and it's durable, and that's it. And water. To be honest, I'm banana and water. In fact, I drink a lot of water now, especially. But those are it. To be honest, those are my snacks. But if I had more plant-based snacks, more savory, indulgent snacks, I would have those as well. But,
you see, well, you mentioned the market potential for more snacks, so we're going to have to get you some. Although the banana is like the ultimate, it's the original snack, because it's so convenient. It's got its own packaging. You carry it wherever you go. Oh my gosh, Jerry, I could talk to you for a long time. We could hit on a lot of subjects here. It is late by you. I think it's 8 or 9 p.m., 9 p.m. now. So I will let you go, but I want to thank you deeply for all that you do, for helping businesses thrive, for helping get plant-based on the radar for so many people, and for having that large scale impact that you do with working with major brands like the Pain Quotidien, the Meatless Farmer. And now you're working with a Finnish brand, Fafa from Finland. Yeah. A falafel company, or a Middle Eastern pita fast food chain. Do I have that right?
It is. It's in Helsinki. It's fantastic. Great founder, great owners, and it's a fantastic business. So, and if you've never been to Helsinki or Finland, it's beautiful country, and
it is gorgeous.
It's incredible people. So absolutely.
I love that you're bringing falafel to Finland. So there's a cultural juxtaposition. I want to see how that plays out. It makes me hopeful for the world, that this could come together. Absolutely. Jerry, don't go anywhere. I want to thank everybody for watching here on YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. Thank you, all of you. This will be out on podcast so very soon. So be sure to subscribe to the Plant-Based Business Hour. It'll also be later on my website, ElysabethAlfano.com, and others. So everybody else, I will see you next week. Jerry, stay put, but I do want to thank you officially for being with me here today on the Plant-Based Business Hour.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everybody. See you next week. Jerry, just